So as just mentioned, for today, we'll focus on our group member evaluation tool, which helps you to address any issues that might happen with group work or, we have, there can be many problems with like free writing or students who feel like they are contributing a lot, whilst others maybe are not. So we see that it can be very valuable to give students the opportunity to give each other feedback based on how they are performing in a group. But it can also be used for other type of use cases where students are maybe evaluating each other's skills. We recently had another school that was using it for students to evaluate each other's nursing skills. So when they had a role play with a patient. So there's different type of use cases possible. And for today, we want to dive into a bit of a general overview, of course, showing you the FeedbackFruits tool suite and then having a live walkthrough in Canvas and how to get started in Canvas with the most important settings. As we mentioned before, there are quite some of you that already are familiar with the tool, so please do share your experiences. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to just unmute or put it in the chat. And then we can dive in. So for those of you who this is the first session, FeedbackFruits is a Dutch company. We are based in Amsterdam and we work together with universities all over the world. So we have a lot of partners, so in the US, Europe, also in Australia. And what we want to do is empower students to learn in every modality. So especially since COVID, of course, there's a big variety in the courses that are offered. So whether it's mostly on campus or hybrid or online, we want to make sure that students have an interesting learning experience throughout. And of course, offer them the opportunity to develop lifelong skills. So things like critical thinking, collaboration, that are also needed in real life or when they're on the work floor. And of course, for students to take more charge of their own learning. So with implementing different type of learning activities throughout the courses, they really can take more charge and more ownership of their learning directions. And how we do this is, like I said, by collaborating with universities in all over the world. And then we look at what are the things that are currently possible or currently not possible in terms of learning activities, but that you do really very much want to see supported or streamlined or saving you time by having the place to do it all at once. So we look at the pedagogy first and then the technology second, just to drive that learning activity. So we've developed a full tool suite that's integrated in Canvas, and that is co-created with partner institutions that I mentioned. And this is a bit of an overview. I'm sure it looks familiar to most of you. So we have different categories of tools, and the university currently has a license for the group member evaluation and the peer review tools. But who knows, in the future, there might be more available to you if there's enough interest, of course. So the difference between the peer review and the group member evaluation is the type of feedback that the students are giving to each other. So on Monday, we had a session where we talked about the peer review tool, where students give each other feedback on submitted work. So things like a draft version of an essay or a recorded presentation, so on a deliverable. Today, we're going to talk about feedback on skills. So what's good to know is that the tools are very similar. So if you set up one, you can also easily set up another. And there's a lot of similarities and key features that all the FeedbackFruits tools have. So it's easy to copy activities once you set them up. You can use them both synchronously and asynchronously. So in a live class, maybe where students give each other feedback on a presentation that they're giving, or outside of the class, whether it's maybe more on the collaboration process. Students can be asked to complete a reflection module at the end of the activity. And of course, it's possible to make everything anonymous if that's better for your case. And teachers will get very detailed students' progress analytics to see and keep track who's participating in the activities. All right, so the tools are integrated in Canvas, and what does it mean? that students automatically have access to the activity after teacher publishes it, so they don't have to go to an external website or create a password. And it's possible, and I think this is something that's mentioned a lot, to use the groups or the group sets that you have available in your courses, so that you can easily select who's going to participate in the learning activity. And then it's possible to publish the grades to the gradebook, and the deadlines are automatically synchronized. And within Canvas, it's very easy to copy or share activities, or when you copy over a course, you will also copy over the FeedbackFruits activity. Are there any questions so far? Don't see anything in the chat. All right. Then let's move on. So the group member evaluation. As I already mentioned at the beginning of the session, it's really meant to improve the group work overall by giving students the opportunity to give each other feedback on their collaboration skills. And what we see is that a lot of the issues that can be there with the group dynamics, they already are minimized when you give them the opportunity, and when you share before the course that you're actually gonna measure them throughout, so that students are maybe more inclined to put in an effort. And another reason why you can, of course, consider to have a group evaluation activity is to get more insight as a teacher in the group process. So how are the students actually collaborating? You can maybe track any issues if there's anything, so that you can prevent them from escalating. You can make sure that students have the opportunity to learn from each other, so facilitate more peer learning, and of course improve their feedback skills altogether. And we see a little bit of a preview what it will look like when students are giving the feedback versus whether they are receiving the feedback. But I'm gonna show you an example now in Canvas and how it works for the students. All right, I have the student open here. So the first thing that you see as a student are the instructions from the teacher, and you will see your group members. And then what you can do is, in the second step, start giving feedback. And in this case, it says set feedback to yourself and your group members, and that is because the self-assessment is enabled. And this is something that we see a lot in the typical group memory evaluation activity, because then students are also asked to reflect, what is my contribution? How am I participating in the team, based on the same criteria that are used to evaluate their group members. And we can see that I still have to give feedback to my team members, but that I already completed my self-assessment. So when I click on continue reviewing, we are brought to this overview, where on the left side we can see the criteria that the teacher has created. And then here, if I click on start, I can start evaluating my first teammate, Franklin. So what we then do, we can navigate through the different criteria. We can read the description, in this case from the rubric, and we can give Franklin the feedback that we think is appropriate. And of course, in addition to more quantitative feedback, you can also let the students write feedback comments, and you can even require this. So you can have just an open comment criterion, or you can have an additional comment to explain a score on the rubric or on the skill that the students have provided. And something that I want to point out here is that overall teachers can be a bit hesitant with publishing the feedback that students are giving to each other, just because it can be very personal. Students don't always know how to phrase their feedback in a constructive way. So of course, it's important to give them tips and to share how some examples of good feedback. And we developed a tool to help students that, and we call it the Automated Feedback Coach, which is powered by AI. And it can read out the criteria that are used for the activity. So what you can do here is, when the student is typing the feedback, so I can say, let's see, I think you did great. Then you see the automated feedback coach is generating. And in this case, it says that it's not constructive and it doesn't address the criteria provided. So please provide more specific examples, and mention an aspect of the work that was done well. So now I can improve and I can say, I think you did great because you had very interesting ideas and you always gave everyone the chance to participate equally, for example. And then we see the AI coach regenerates, and now it says, well done, your feedback was constructed because you mentioned more of the area. So then I can post the feedback, and then my group member, Franklin, will be able to read it once the feedback is published. Here we also see review the feedback. This is something after we finish and the feedback is published, then Franklin can also review the quality of my feedback. So he can indicate on a scale 1 to 10 how valuable was the feedback that I just that I gave him. So that will be published later at the end. I can move on to the next one and to my next group member. For now, I'm going to finish it later. And what's good to know is that for each of the steps, you can also set a deadline so that the students move through it in a more guided way. So first, for example, that they have to give the feedback before they can read the feedback that they've received from others. You can also leave it open, but what we see usually is that if students have a deadline, they are more motivated to first finish the feedback before they can actually read what others are saying about them. And of course, we also have examples where somebody maybe doesn't publish the feedback, but just uses it as their own input. But what we will see when you read the feedback, you will see the criteria again, and then with the results. So we see a column with the self-assessment, and then in comparison to the feedback that I received. In this case, only one of my peers has completed it, but if more come in, we'll see the aggregated scores here. So we can kind of compare how did I do. And to see if there's any outliers. So far we see that that's quite similar, but maybe there's a case where a student is very underconfident and gives themselves a really strict self-assessment while they get very positive feedback from their peers, or the other way around. So that is something that you can also see as a teacher, which I will demonstrate in a minute. The last thing for the student in this case would be to look at the grading. We see the teacher has published the grade already, but since I'm not finished yet, I still have some more points to earn. So after the activity is completed, I'll make sure to check again, and you can see your grade breakdown at the bottom. All right, that's it from the student. Does anyone have any questions here or any comments that you want to share?
I had a question, Milou. When Franklin writes his feedback about your comment or your review of his work, do you see that again as a student? Where does that go?
Let's see. I think because I haven't received that now, I won't be able to see it. But it will be here at the bottom. So in my review for Franklin. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you would see that down there. He would give a rating or a comment, and it would show up.
It will be a scale like this, but then 1 to 10, and I will be able to see it here. And also if he wrote a comment, then I can also reply to that and see it here.
Great, thank you.
Good question, thanks. Was there any other question right now? If not, I'll switch to the teacher side and point out some of the features here. So this is the same activity, but then what we see now is at the top, we see the student progress overview with the different groups and the students in it. And what this gives you is kind of a quick understanding how the students are working and how they're doing with the activity. So whether they read the instructions, basically whether they've opened it, Did they finish the self-assessment or not? How are they doing with giving the feedback? So did they complete it or not yet? Or do they still need to get started? And then also whether they've posted some comments and read the feedback. You can also download all the analytics here, and I think there's a really interesting recording from the pilot where Ginny shares all the ins and outs from the data export, which I think was really helpful to see, because what you can do there is kind of see all the scores that students are giving, all the feedback, everything in one overview. But of course, you can also see that within the FeedbackFruits activity. But if you would want to do your own analysis, this is where you can download that. Yeah, Randy, please go ahead.
And just as a reminder, the overall student progress, this was confusing to people. Here it says 0 out of 21 have completed. This isn't just doing the reviews, this is reading the reviews, this is doing everything that's required within the activity. So it may look like you don't have many students participating because this is actually, have they completed every single task? And that was a bit confusing to people.
Thank you for pointing it out. That's indeed correct. And in this case also, this is a sample activity, so no one actually finished it. But for you, it will also take a while before you see the students have finished it. And you do need to make sure that if you, for example, if you don't publish the feedback, then it also won't show up as completed here. So it's always good to see it a little bit in the context of your activity. But if you do want to know for the students, you can also see and filter here, for example. So you can also see which students still have to get started and which students are already really far along. And then as a teacher, you will of course want to know how are the students rating each other. So under step 2, in the given reviews, we have a lot of information. So we can see a heat map where you can have a quick overview of how the students are, well, how strict the students are, whether they're giving each other all really high scores, or in this case, it's a bit more mixed. So you see the darker the blue, the more students that shows a particular criterion. Or a particular rating, sorry. And we see the average ratings as well. So we can see that some of these might need a little more attention. So you can also help and customize some of your instructions if you see that a particular criterion scores a bit low. And we also developed insights feature, which shows the keywords per criterion that students use frequently in their feedback. So in this case, if we look at the contributions, we see that, of course, contribution is a word that students frequently mention. And then we can scroll through all the feedback comments that students have written. That includes this keyword. So that's something to help you have a bit of a quicker understanding what the students are writing about. And we see here the keywords for the overall activity as well. And it works in the same way. Then another way to help you understand how the students are progressing with the activity is through the student progress bar, where you can see whether they still need to get started or whether they just started or mostly completed, or if they would be fully completed, that will also be indicated. And something that's also good to point out is that you can also search for particular students. So sometimes a teacher gets a question from a student, then you can also easily find them and see how they are doing. And we see some other things here, namely the average review rating that students are giving in comparison to the self-assessment. So you can also see if maybe some students are being a bit more generous in their scores towards others compared to themselves, or the other way around, what we can see here for Maximilian. And of course, you also have insight into the whole feedback process. So you can see, well, we just saw that heat map. You also have that heat map available per group if you just want to quickly spot what are the outliers in a particular group. You can see in this case that there's one student that received the really low score for different criterion. And then here you can also see who that student is. So that would be something to get a bit of an understanding for the group overall, but you can also navigate through the individual reviews here via the navigation bar.
Milu, could you back up for a moment to the comparison where you were comparing the self-assessment to how, is that how other students are rating that person versus how they rated themselves? Or is that how people are rating others versus how they rated themselves? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that's a very good question. Makes a lot of sense. It's always important to see which step am I looking at. So here in the given reviews, what I can see is the average review rating that I gave, or Maximilian in this case gave, in comparison to his self-assessment. What we will see in the step below, in the received ratings, is where you can see the average review rating that a student received in comparison to the self-assessment. So I think, not sure, but I would assume that this is where most teachers look at, because here you can have more of an overview. What does a student think about themselves, and what do the others think about them? But of course, if you want to see maybe if there's somebody who's really a strict rater, then we can also filter on the higher and the lower score. So I think there is quite some information here for you to explore. Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yes, that does. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question
Yeah, sure.
about this section here that we're looking at?
Mhm.
Do the students only appear in the list after they've participated, submitted, done reviews, etc., or do they show
Mhm.
up? Is it the whole list of students, those who have and those who have not participated?
That is a good question. So at the top, we see everybody. We see that there's 21 students enrolled. And then the further down we go, we see how many students are active from that step. Since this
Okay.
is a group activity, you will see everyone, but you see in this case, this student, it doesn't show any rating because they haven't started yet. If it's not a group activity but an individual activity, they will only show up once they're active in this step. But because here students are also maybe receiving feedback without being active themselves yet, you will still see them, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
That makes,
So
yeah, it
everybody,
does.
yeah,
What
everybody will show up, but you will see here how many are actually active.
Okay. And then what was the card that we were looking at up at the top that showed everybody? What was that one?
Do you mean this one?
Yeah,
Or
overall.
what?
Yeah, I think it was this overall student progress.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yes, we were here under the received ratings. So what we can actually do, what I would also recommend, is going full screen so that you can see all the analytics. And then this will also show one of the features that we haven't discussed yet, which is the outlier feature. And we came up with this because we receive a lot of data because the students are all giving each other feedback. And this is available if you enable the self-assessment and let students review everyone in their group. After there's enough data available, the tool will calculate if there's any significant situations that you need to be aware of as a teacher, such as here we see a low performer, where a student really receives low scores in comparison to the group average. So we see that this condition is triggered when their overall average is less than 50%. So that can be just as a warning for you that maybe you need to have a look what's going on there. Students don't see the outlier labels. This is only for teachers. We see another one here that's a clique, where it seems as if students in the group maybe stopped cooperating and having very much disagreements of how one particular group member is performing. So maybe one student gives me the highest scores and another student gives me the lowest scores. So that really doesn't seem to make sense. We also have other outliers, things like if somebody's an overperformer or underperformer, and you will also be able to read more about this in a help article that we have, which I'll share later. But that can be an easy way to spot if there's anything that you need to be aware of as a teacher. And of course, you can also navigate through the individual reviews. So you can also, like we just showed here with Maximilian, you can open it up and view the feedback and even respond to the feedback comments if you would want to be involved or clarify something that somebody is saying. So here as a teacher, you can also give additional feedback. And what I didn't show in the student side, but what is possible for all feedback comments, regardless of the tool that you're using, is to record an audio or video clip in addition or instead of written comments, or even record your screen or attach a file to the comments.
And one more thing, Milu, as an instructor, you also have the ability to actually do a full review of your own as well. There are videos on the YouTube channel that walk you through that, but you can actually do that review on your own as well.
Exactly. If I click here, then I'm also added as a reviewer, as a teacher myself. So then I can also give additional feedback if that's, of course, something that you want to do. So thanks for pointing that out, Randy. Then the last thing from the teacher side is the grading. And in case of group member evaluation, there's different types of grading possible. So what we see now is just the standard grading where we see the students are getting points for completing the different steps of the activity. So for finishing the feedback, reading the feedback, for the scores that they received on the different criteria. And then what we can see here is that the final thing is that you can always have control in if you want to adjust the grade. So if you want to give somebody some higher or a lower grade for whatever reason, you are always in control. But what we see, if we scroll here, the group contribution factor, this is a score that's calculated based on the students' relative performance to their group members. So it's a score between 0 and 2. And if a student scores a little bit above 1, it means that they scored a bit higher than the group average overall. And if they score below 1, it means that they scored a bit lower. And this factor can also be used to individualize student scores. So what you can do if you want to do that, so let's say students had a presentation together and they received a 80% for the presentation, but you want to individualize the group grades based on the student's performance in the group, you can decide to customize the grades to make it individual. So here we see, let me do this full screen. We see the students in group 1. We can see the self-to-peer assessment, and we see the group contribution factor, and we see, what did I say, an 80%? That would be the group project grade. Then we see here 2 students who scored a bit above 1, 1 student who scored significantly below 1, which you can assume that this student then had a little bit of a lower contribution to the team. So the tool will suggest an automated grade adjustment. And if you think, yeah, I think that's a good idea, then you see that that results in a slightly lower grade for this student based on the group contribution factor. The other 2 students in this case will keep the same grade. And if you are done, you can publish the grades and they will be pushed over to the Canvas gradebook. And in the Canvas grading settings, when you set up the activity, that's also where you decide how much this is worth. So if this 10% of the grade, or maybe it's just fully formative, so you can also just say there's 0 points and students will just see their grade in FeedbackFruits too as kind of more of a progress type of grade.
Okay.
So I think those were the most important features, at least for now, to point out. So
Can I ask you a question? So, especially since we're back on the edit page for the assignment here, how does the grading in FeedbackFruits integrate with the speed grader tool in Canvas? That was an area. It probably wasn't on a group member eval activity, but on another, I was like, oh, I'm not sure how these 2 things fit together.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I'm glad you asked so that we can have a look. What's good to know in FeedbackFruits when you set up the grade, and I'll shift it back to the normal grading. You can configure what you want to have included in the grading. So sometimes we see that it's more based on the progress with the activity and just, let's see here. What is important that it always counts up to 100%. So FeedbackFruits grade is a percentage grade, but you can also say that it's a pass fail or a percentage. So those are the 2 options. when you are in Canvas, when you're setting up the activity, you have the additional, oh, I clicked too quickly here, the edit assignment settings. If you navigate to that, you will be able to say how many points the FeedbackFruits activity will be worth. And then after you publish it, it will automatically transfer the grades in that form. So now we see this was 100, but this can also be 10 points or 5 points. And also how you want it displayed. So if I save this now, I think I'm going to have to republish. Let's see. No, let's actually go to the gradebook. So you will automatically see a column in the gradebook with the name of the FeedbackFruits activity and then also with the amount of points that the students received. So yeah, so this was the one, so it was worth 100 points. So I should publish it again after you edit the grade. That's what I thought. But just to show you, this is the grades that the students will see. And you can even see a little breakdown of the grades. If I go to the particular grade, you can show the rubric. So students will also be able to see the breakdown of the grade in the grade center. If that's, I'm not sure if they will actually do it, but it is possible.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does help. So it sounds like the FeedbackFruits grade settings of percent or pass fail are overridden by the settings in the assignment that contains the FeedbackFruits.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the FeedbackFruits grades, the percentage grade that just stays within FeedbackFruits. So students can see there, oh, I got a 75% for the FeedbackFruits activity, but maybe that means that they got, 5 or 6 points in total for their final grade.
Okay. And then what about speed grader in the assignment? Like if you go back to the edit page for the assignment, over on the right, our typical tool for grading is the speed grader in Canvas. And
let me navigate back.
Our faculty, we might have to sort of work with them a little bit to get out of the habit of going to speed grader. But speed grader's still there. What impact does that have?
Where do I see the speed grader?
I'm sorry, my mistake. Not the edit page. That was my mistake. If you're just on the
so here, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Just give it a second.
Oh yeah, here the speed grader. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think well, maybe you can share in case of a peer feedback activity, how would teachers use the speed grader usually, you think?
Well, I mean, there are peer review options in Canvas assignments, and speed grader is the tool you would use to grade before FeedbackFruits. That's the tool that you use to grade assignments. So if you click speed grader, you'll see it. And it's it's the sort of built-in feature for grading. So you can put in a score. So you see over on the right, you can put in a score. You can use the rubric, the Canvas rubric to do scoring. And you have a space there for comments, which is a little further down, more sort of written feedback below right. Do you see it says add a comment, so written feedback and so forth. Over on the left is where you see the work the student has submitted. If it's a Word doc, what have you. So and up at the top, there's a drop-down list of the students. Yeah, there you go. So you would see a list of the students. So that's just a quick orientation to what this is. But when we're using FeedbackFruits, are we just gonna leave speed grader alone? Or
exactly.
We need to go to speed grader and confirm a score, or is there anything we need to do in speed grader, I guess is the question.
That is a very good question. And I would say if you are using FeedbackFruits activity, there is no need to use the speed grader, because as you just saw, you won't see much or actually anything from the activity. So I think that I have heard of some teachers that use then the speed grading to grade maybe the quality of the feedback, but then you would have the FeedbackFruits activity open and then the speed grader on a different screen or different tab. So you can still, I can still imagine some cases where you use it, but usually we see that everything is done in the FeedbackFruits activity, so it kind of replaces the need for the speed grader a bit.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have a question or maybe related to the integration in Canvas? Or if maybe somebody has a use case where you can share a little bit more about how you've if you've experienced the tool so far, or if any tips and tricks for your colleagues. If not right now, I can also still show you some of the features that are useful for you to learn about. So what you already saw in the edit mode, that's where you can still make changes to the activity. So you can do that at any point, also when the students got started. Then it will just be a little bit restricted because of course you cannot change everything. But you will always be able to change the instructions. And something that we see teachers doing a lot here is recording video with video instructions to make it a little bit more personal, especially if you have online courses where maybe the teacher-student contact is a bit limited. You can also do this as a nice personal touch. And then it's also good to point out that this is where you can select the groups from Canvas. So you will see here the groups sync automatically. So in this case, the last time it happened was 4 minutes ago. And then we can see the group sets with the groups and the students that are in a particular group. So you can select all of them. You can also see that if I try to select a section with multiple students that overlap, that's not possible. So you will only be able to select the students in a group once. And then if you select the groups, then the next thing to do is to set up the criteria. And in this case, we've made use of a rubric, skill rating, and comments. And those are also generally the 3 types of criteria that you can use. So for a rubric, it's really straightforward as you know it. You can customize the levels and give it a description. And for the skill rating, it's also very straightforward. Just different point skills are possible here. And you can also customize the text and what that means. And then the last thing would be an open comment, which is allowing the students or requiring the students to give some written feedback. And in this section, you can also say how many reviews the students have to do. So in case of a group assessment, it means that they have to review everyone in their group. And you can require the self-assessment. And then you have the option to enable the outlier detection. And also first to schedule deadlines. If you want to have a deadline, you can make sure that the activity closes after a certain date. And then we have some other features. I think this one's good to point out, the guiding students. This is where you can see that automated feedback coach that I demonstrated. So if you want to give that a try, that we'll be able to see here. And of course, if you want to make it anonymous, that's also possible. Of course, this cannot be changed. So after you choose one and the students got started, you cannot suddenly make it non-anonymous. And that's, of course, to protect the students. And then this is where Janice asked a question about the rating the students. So you can ask the students to give each other feedback based on a 1 to 10 scale after they read all the feedback. How valuable did they think it was? And then what you can also do is add that reflection module at the end of the activity to let the students take a moment to think about the feedback that they received and maybe if there's something that they would like to improve on the next time. And again, it's possible to set some word limits or set a deadline. So you can make it as big or as simple as you want. And usually I recommend people, if it's the first time you're doing a peer feedback activity with FeedbackFruits, to just keep it as simple as possible. Start small with some of the defaults and then keep building on it if you and the students feel more comfortable. So yeah, that's the most important thing. We already discussed the grading a little bit. So of course, important to save it. And what is good to know is that if you want to, you can create a template from your activity, which means that you will save it into your library. So I can do that to show you what that looks like. Now I've just saved it. Let's see. Oh. And what that means is that if I create a new activity, that's also good to show, which you can do under assignments in Canvas. You could also do it under modules, but then there's no connection to the gradebook. So we do usually recommend to create it here under the assignment. And then you select that FeedbackFruits is an external tool. And here you can also already indicate the points. And we see the test here at the bottom. See, some people have to hop off, so thanks for joining. And let's see. Then here under external tool, that's where we find FeedbackFruits. And you will only see one of them, but we have different integrations in different of our servers. So that's why we see a couple. And then this brings us to the tool picker menu where you can see the tools that are available and where you can select the one that you want to use. And we see, let me open this up a little bit more. Here on the right side, the library, which shows the template. So this is the template that I just created. So if I want to reuse it, it will be very easy. I can just select it and then it will take over the same settings as before. And it also shows up in your library. And I think this is especially for you as instructional designers that it's interesting where you can kind of prepare activity templates and then later on put them into courses. And we also have the option to have a shared library where you can collaborate with your colleagues. Maybe here we see an example for business school or College of Health that you have templates that are only relevant for colleagues that are working in that school. And what that means is that if you create the templates there, they will show up here in the tool picker. So we see, because I'm enrolled in the business school, I will only see the business school templates. And then here I see the normal tools that I can get started from scratch, basically. So there's lots of opportunities if you want to scale it up a little bit, and if you want to reuse activities in different courses, then you can do so. And the easiest way is to save it as a template or to share it with a colleague. And if you start from scratch, then you will just get an empty setup where you can fill out the settings that we just walked through very easily. All right. We have a few more minutes, so are there any final questions maybe before I show some of the final resources? No questions. I think for some of you, this is already something you've heard a couple of times, so that's good. Then I do want to point out that if there is a lot of support available. First, there's the Community of Practice Teams page where Randy and colleagues will also share a lot of information about the new releases and about any updates and meetings. And from the FeedbackFruits side, we have a lot of instruction videos on our YouTube page. We have help center articles, ebooks if you want to dive into the pedagogy behind the tools a little bit more, or use cases to learn some more best practices from colleagues around the world. And the most important thing to know is that we have human support. So we have a lot of cool AI tools, but our support will remain human. So if you want to reach out and you have a question, they are available Monday to Friday on working days. And you can find it within the tool, so the blue chat button, or you can just email them to support@feedbackfruits.com. And they usually reply within 5 minutes. So I think that would be the easiest way to go to. And now I will really stop sharing my screen and see if there is any final remarks, maybe from Randy.
I found the help button to be quite good. I've asked questions and folks have provided responses, and then if my questions are a bit too intense, it'll get escalated into an actual help ticket, and then I'll deal with somebody else, an engineer or something like that. So I found that to be pretty solid on the help side.
That's good to hear. And thank you, Anne. That's good to know. And it was the first time you heard about it, so I'm glad you liked it. Oh, Janice, you're muted.
These are complex tools, and I'm sure for somebody who's new, it can be a little bit overwhelming, but getting in and playing with it is really the best way to become familiar with it. And maybe we can have in a couple of weeks or two a time to do a lunch and learn, maybe, Randy, where people can ask their questions, or feel free to do so on the site as well, on our Community of Practice site. Thanks, Malou.
Yeah, thank you too. It's good to see you again.
Any other questions? Well, if not, looks like we can return about 7 minutes to your day, and we'll hopefully get everybody engaged in the community. If you have questions, I encourage people to ask questions in the community. If you have knowledge of an answer, by all means, jump into the community and provide feedback for folks when they have those questions. And then we'll try and schedule some lunch and learns in the community. We won't be doing every week like we did during the pilot, but we'll probably do like a once a month thing in the community, unless there's something that comes up and people really need a walkthrough or something like that, and we can schedule something special. So if we don't have anything else, then I guess we can turn everybody loose.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Randy. Take care, everyone.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much.